Hi, everyone. Hope you're all having a good day. We've been working over telling the difference between complete sentences and fragments and run-ons. Yesterday, you had a practice assignment to try to test yourself and see how well you know the difference between these. And I know there was an answer key at the end, so you could check your work. You could tell whether whether your answers are correct or not. But I want to go over this and talk about why the answers are what they are. And so we'll go ahead and start with number one. Although Mary has been my best friend, and we know the answer to that is fragment, because well, we could fix that in one of two ways. We could get rid of the first word there, the subordinating conjunction, and leave Mary has been my best friend. Then it would be a complete sentence. Or you could leave although there, and although Mary has been my best friend, comma, lately we have not been talking much. You could finish the thought. So you could fix that in one of two ways, but as it stands, it is a fragment. Number two says, no one I know watches that television show. I can't believe it. So what we have here is a run-on, a special kind of run-on called a comma splice. You cannot put two complete independent clauses together with a comma. So no one I know watches that television show, period. I can't believe it. Or you could put a semicolon here, or you could change it around and say, I can't believe that no one I know watches that television show. So the good thing about this is there are multiple ways of making something that is not a complete sentence into a complete sentence, and those are the methods I would recommend. Number three, her husband loves to cook. However, he does not like to clean the kitchen afterwards. All right, so this one's kind of a specialized one. Her husband loves to cook, and then, however, you actually have to have a period there and then start with a capital. However, doesn't function like some of the other conjunctions that you'd see. So you're probably not going to see anything like that on a test. That one's a little more advanced, but just for your knowledge, there's a period that goes there and then a capital H. We start a whole new sentence here. Technically, it is a run-on. Number four, Tim started his new job last Wednesday and he really likes the boss. Now, this one is actually a complete sentence because we have two complete independent clauses. Tim started his new job last Wednesday and he really likes his boss. So there are two independent clauses. However, it is joined by a comma and a conjunction. That's another way to join two independent clauses, with a comma and a conjunction. All right, so that one is a complete sentence. Number five, I have a hard time understanding her lectures. When I talk to her one-on-one, I understand her fine. All right, so this one is going to be a comma splice, which is a particular kind of a run-on sentence. I have a hard time understanding her lectures, period. When I talk to her one-on-one, I understand her fine. So this is an independent clause. This is an independent clause. They cannot be joined together with a comma. Now let's take a look at this particular part of it. We have a dependent clause. When I talk to her one-on-one, that's a dependent clause, but it's attached to an independent clause. I understand her fine. So this all together works as a complete sentence, but you can't connect it to the other independent clause with just a comma. It has to be a period, a semicolon, or a comma and a conjunction. Number six, Mary signed up because she thought the training would be interesting and help her on the job. That is a complete sentence. It's pretty long. Remember that length doesn't matter. So just because it's long doesn't make it a run-on. Mary signed up because she thought the training would be interesting and help her on the job. So it all flows as one continuous thought. It's a complete sentence. Meet me after class. I want to talk with you about the upcoming test. That one is a run-on. Meet me after class is an independent clause. I want to talk with you about the upcoming test is an independent clause. You cannot stick those two together with a comma. So again, we have the comma splice. We could turn that into a semicolon. We could say, meet me after class because I want to talk with you about the upcoming test. And actually, that would probably be the best way because it shows the relationship among the ideas. All right, let's take a look at number 8. The one who looks like a military officer but acts like a spoiled brat. That one is a fragment. What makes it a fragment is the fact that we have the one who does all of this stuff, but it doesn't finish the thought. The one who looks like a military officer but acts like a spoiled brat is my cousin. Something like that. You've got to finish the thought, or there's another way to take care of that. You could say that one and get rid of who, because who is a subordinating conjunction. We could say that one looks like a military officer but acts like a spoiled brat. Then it would be a complete sentence. Number 9, although she has studied very hard, she is still worried about the midterm exam. All right, so this one is a complete sentence because we have an independent clause here. It can stand alone as a complete sentence. She is still worried about the midterm exam. The beginning clause is a dependent clause, though. So if you have a dependent clause connected to an independent clause, then you have a complete sentence. Although is the subordinating conjunction that turns this into a fragment or a dependent clause. Although she has studied very hard. And that's really a pretty good sentence. Number 10, one of the best ways to improve your writing is to, hold on. There's a period there. Somebody got happy with the periods. One of the best ways to improve your writing, that is a fragment, is to read and analyze what you read. That's another fragment. So we have 2 fragments connected with a period, and that's going to be incorrect. So that one, actually we have 2 fragments there instead of just 1. Number 11, it has been a long time since I have been to the beach. I am looking forward to the trip. All right, so we have an independent clause here. This one can stand alone as a complete sentence. It has a complete thought. It has a subject and a verb. And the same thing here. I am looking forward to the trip. Those are 2 complete sentences, or 2 complete independent clauses. Again, you can't just paste those together with a comma. That's called a comma splice. Number 12, when you have finished your homework and are ready to take a break. That one is a fragment. When you have finished your homework and are ready to take a break, comma, I will bake you some cookies. We've got to finish the thought, or we could get rid of this word and just make a complete statement. You have finished your homework and are ready to take a break. That functions as a complete sentence. All right, let's move on then to part 2. If your parents think today's fashions are weird. Well, that's an incomplete thought, so it's a fragment. If your parents think today's fashions are weird, comma, oh, guess what? If you take this and put it at the end here and change that period to a comma and combine these 2, then you would have a really good sentence. If your parents think today's fashions are weird, comma, they should see the clothes people wore in the Middle Ages. So if you combine those, then you would have a complete sentence. This one actually functions as a complete sentence by itself. It is the independent clause. So if you took this dependent clause, connected it to the independent clause, then you would have a complete sentence. But number 2 actually functions as a complete sentence by itself. Patterns of floral or geometric shapes popular. All right, that one just doesn't express a complete thought. It's missing something. It's missing a verb, are. So popular is an adjective. It tells you more about the patterns. But it doesn't, there's really no verb in here. So remember that the 3 elements that you need for a complete sentence are subject, verb, and complete thought. Well, this is missing a verb. And if you're missing a verb or a subject, you are also going to miss the complete thought. Number 4, liked clothes that were half one color and half another. All right, so what we're missing there, that one is a fragment. What we're missing there is a subject. Who liked clothes that were half one color and half the other? We don't know. There's a subject missing in number 4. Number 5, might have one green leg and one red leg. Again, the subject is missing. We don't know what that thing is. I'm assuming we're talking about a pair of pants. So a pair of pants might have one green leg and one red leg. In that case, the thought would be complete, but as it stands, number 5 is a fragment. Number 6, people often heavy leather belts decorated with metal and jewels. Another fragment because we're missing a verb. People often what? Heavy leather. Oh, so we should probably put a verb in there, something like wore. And to me, this just looks like somebody got in a hurry and didn't double check their work and accidentally left out a verb. That's understandable. We do that sometimes, but that's why proofreading is really important. People often wore heavy leather belts and decorated with metal and jewels would be a complete sentence, but as it stands, number 6 is a fragment. Number 7, edges of clothing into shapes called, I don't know how to pronounce that, but I'm going to do my best. Daggies, we'll call it that. We'll go with that one. Edges of clothing into shapes called daggies. That just looks like it's a fragment. It looks like somebody tried to connect that with something. I'm not sure what, but it just doesn't make sense the way it is. It's an incomplete thought. It is a fragment. Number 8, sleeves with streamers that were 2 or 3 feet long. Another fragment. What makes this a fragment is the word that. Sleeves with streamers were 2 or 3 feet long. That would be a complete sentence. But because the word that is placed in the middle, it turns that complete sentence into a fragment. Again, the subordinating conjunction does not have to come at the beginning of a sentence. Sometimes it can be placed in the middle. So, we've talked about the fact that length doesn't mean anything when it comes to a subject or a complete sentence, a fragment, or a run-on. And so we have the subordinating conjunction here. We have a fragment, and we need to either finish the thought or get rid of the word that. Number 9, shoes had toes that were padded to retain their shape. That is a complete sentence because we have a subject, shoes, the verb had, and then the rest of the predicate here. Long toes would be a direct object. We haven't really gotten into that yet, but then we have another group of words here that tells you more about the long toes, but it is a complete sentence. Tights of velvet or silk. There's no verb there. We just have tights and then some adjectives, and that's about it. They're not really doing anything. They're not being anything, so we don't have a complete thought there. That one is a fragment. Number 11, when clothes were edged and lined in fur. Again, a fragment. Why is it a fragment? Because of this subordinating conjunction. We could say clothes were edged and lined in fur. That would be a complete sentence, but when we tack that word onto the beginning, it turns it into a fragment. So again, we could either get rid of something or we can add something. When clothes were edged and lined in fur, comma, something happened. I don't know. I'm not sure what this person's going after, but we have to add something to the end and turn that period into a comma in order to make this into a complete sentence. Layers very common in medieval clothing. Another fragment. Layers were, we're missing a verb, were. Layers were very common in medieval clothing. And again, that looks like somebody just got kind of sloppy with their verbs. They were thinking it in their head. Maybe they're typing a little too fast and just skipped over the verb. And the thing is, sometimes when you create a sentence like this and you read it over and you try to proofread it yourself, your mind will insert that missing verb in there. That's why peer evaluation is really important. You should find a friend, somebody to look over your work to make sure that you're not missing those things, because somebody else's mind will not insert that missing verb like yours will. Okay, number 13, was a way of displaying wealth. Okay, looks to me like layers very common in medieval clothing was a way of displaying wealth. Maybe you can combine these two. You'd have to change was into were to make the verb agree. But yeah, this is a fragment that's missing a subject. What was a way of displaying wealth? It's not mentioned in that sentence. 14, the more clothes a person could afford to wear, the wealthier that person was. That is a complete sentence. The wealthier that person was is not a complete sentence. So therefore, this is not a comma splice. Let's move on to number 15. Might wear a short sleeve tunic over a long sleeve tunic with a sleeveless mantle all over. Now, you might look at this and think, well, that's a pretty average length, so it must be a complete sentence. However, it is a fragment because there's no subject here. Who might wear a short sleeve tunic? Doesn't say. It just starts right away with the verb, but there's nobody there doing that verb. Number 16, the usual head covering for men, a hood with an attached cape and long extended point like a tail. Again, you might think this is a pretty average length, so it must be a complete sentence, but actually it's missing a verb. The usual head covering for men, a simple verb like was right here, would take care of it and make it a complete sentence. Number 17, women wore a neckcloth pinned to their braids, hiding their hair. This is a complete sentence. Now, you might look at this and think, well, there's a comma there, so it must be a comma splice, therefore it must be a run-on. But in order for it to be a run-on, whatever happens on one side of the comma has to be an independent clause, and what happens on the other side has to be an independent clause. And hiding their hair is not an independent clause. Women wore a neckcloth pinned to their braids. This is an independent clause. So you can have a dependent clause and an independent clause together to form a complete sentence. What you cannot have are two independent clauses stuck together with a comma. So number 17 is a complete sentence. Number 18, on top of the head would wear a veil, a linen crown, or a small round hat. Well, again, nice average length sentence, so don't just look at this and break out your ruler and say, well, it's the right length, so it must be a complete sentence. It is missing a verb. On top of the head, actually it's not missing a verb, it's missing a subject. On top of the head, women would wear a veil, or queens would wear a veil, or I'm not sure who this person is, but that's pretty vital information, and without it, we have a fragment. All right, let's take a look at number 19. In the Middle Ages, women wore jeweled metal nets over their coiled braids. That one is a complete sentence. We start off with a prepositional phrase, in the Middle Ages, and then we have the subject, women, and we have the verb, wore, and then we have the rest of this, jeweled metal nets over their coiled braids. This is what we call the direct object, and this is another prepositional phrase, so it all fits together as a complete sentence. The thought is complete, and therefore it's a complete sentence. Current fashions, a little boring in comparison. All right, so again, we have a fragment because it's missing a verb. Current fashions were a little boring, or are a little boring in comparison, so we've got to make sure we put that verb in there. Now, sometimes depending on your speech patterns, some people leave verbs out when they speak, and everybody has sort of a different dialect, a different way of constructing their casual speech, and we can get away with that in casual speech, but not in formal writing. All right, let's take a look at part 3. Antarctica has the highest average elevation of the 7 continents. That is a complete sentence. We have a subject, Antarctica. We have a verb, has, and then we have a direct object here, has the highest average elevation, and then a prepositional phrase, and so it all fits together as a complete sentence. The thought is complete. No native people on Antarctica. That's a fragment. No native people live on Antarctica, so it's missing a verb. Because it is too cold. That one is a fragment. And it's not a fragment because it starts with the word because. I know sometimes teachers in some of the younger grades like to tell their students not to start sentences with the word because. Actually, you can start a sentence with the word because. Teachers in the younger grades tell their students not to do that sometimes because it lends itself to creating a fragment, but that's only if you don't finish the thought. So because it is too cold, no native people live on Antarctica. You could finish the thought, but yes, it is okay to start a sentence with the word because. You just have to finish the thought. Number 4, scientists and other workers live in Antarctica for about a year at a time. That is a complete sentence. We have actually 2 subjects, scientists, other workers, and then the verb live, and then a couple of prepositional phrases, in Antarctica for about a year at a time. We have 3 in a row. But we have the subject and the verb and the complete thought, and that's what's important. These people there to study many things. That one is a fragment. Again, we're missing a verb. These people are there to study many things. Number 6, examine the ozone layer, sleep patterns, and fish survival in sub-zero temperatures. That one is a fragment because it doesn't say who is doing the examining. It doesn't have a subject. I suppose if you were to tell somebody, if this were a command form, if you were pointing your finger at somebody and says, hey, examine the ozone layer, sleep patterns, and fish survival in sub-zero temperatures. If it's a command form, the understood you might have studied that before, would be the subject. And I suppose you could argue the case that would be a complete sentence in that case. But as it's written, it's going to be a fragment. Number 7, 95% of Antarctica covered with ice. We are missing a verb is. 95% of Antarctica is covered with ice, so it's a fragment because it's missing a verb. Number 8, Antarctica contains approximately 70% of the world's fresh water in its ice. That is a complete sentence. Antarctica is the subject, contains is the verb, and what does it contain? Water, and there's some more information there, and we'll get more into how those things function a little bit later, but right now we're just talking about complete sentences, fragments, and run-ons. Number 9, even though Antarctica is covered in ice and snow, it can be considered a desert. This one is a complete sentence, and let's talk about why. Even though Antarctica is covered in ice and snow is a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. The last part can stand alone as a complete sentence. It can be considered a desert. This is an independent clause. Now, it might look a little strange that the dependent clause is actually longer than the independent clause, but that's not unusual. Just because something is long doesn't make it more important than something that is shorter. So the dependent clause can be longer than the independent clause, than the main clause of the sentence. So we have a dependent connected to an independent. We have a complex sentence going on there, and it is a complete sentence. Number 10, a desert, an area that gets very little precipitation. All right, again, it's a fragment because we're missing a verb. The desert is an area that gets very little precipitation. Number 11, Antarctica receives only 2 inches of rain each year. That is a complete sentence. We have a subject, Antarctica. We have a verb, receives. And what does it receive? 2 inches of rain. So it's a complete thought. Number 12, it also has very high winds. They can reach over 200 miles per hour. That one is going to be a run-on because we have 2 independent clauses. It also has very high winds, period. They can reach over 200 miles per hour. Now, there are lots of different ways we can fix this one. We can put a period there where I said to put the period. We can also change the word they to that. It also has very high winds that can reach over 200 miles per hour. And I think that's probably the best way to take care of that problem. Just change they to that. Number 13, sometimes winds as high as 200 miles per hour. Well, that's a fragment because sometimes winds as high as 200 miles per hour do something, and yeah, we're missing a verb there in number 13, and therefore we're also missing the complete thought. Number 14, many animals live in the ocean around Antarctica. They are adapted to the cold. That's a run-on because we're back to our comma splice here. We've got one part of this that can function alone. We've got another part that can function alone as a complete sentence. You cannot stick those together with a comma. It's called a comma splice. The word splice is a little bit like the opposite of the word slice. So to slice something means to cut it in half, make it into two. Splice, though, means to put things together and make them into one. And if you're familiar with splicing wires together with some electrical tape or with some solder or something like that, then you know the word splice, and we cannot splice things together with a comma. Number 15, they include whales and seals. Well, it's really short, so it must be a fragment, right? Nope, trick question. Remember, length doesn't mean anything. They is the subject, include is the verb, and we have some direct objects here. So we have subject, a verb, and a complete thought, and it ends with a period. It starts with a capital, so it's going to be a complete sentence. Number 16, one type of bird found on Antarctica is the penguin. All right, and the subject in this sentence is type. It's not bird, because bird is in a prepositional phrase, and we cannot have subjects in prepositional phrases. So the word type is a subject. Is the verb, and then the penguin is the subject complement at the end there. So we have a complete sentence, a complete thought. Antarctica is so isolated that its snow and ice are very pure. Another complete sentence. Antarctica is a subject. You know what? I just corrected that in my head and I gave you the wrong answer. Antarctica is so isolated that its snow and ice are very pure. So number 17 is actually a fragment. And sometimes we do this, right? I think that's a good illustration of sometimes when we read so quickly that we automatically just insert those words that are supposed to be there, especially if the word starts with S. Antarctica is so isolated. And if you read that out loud really fast, it would almost sound like a complete sentence. Antarctica is so isolated, because you don't really say the word is when you're saying that out loud, because it ends with an S. This one begins with an S, so it'd be very easy to sort of hyper correct that in your mind, but it has to be on the paper. So number 17 is actually a fragment. Number 18, the continent is far away from pollution. Again, a complete sentence. Continent is the subject, is the verb, and then this finishes the thought. Number 19, a mountain range crosses the continent. It is completely frozen. This is a run-on. I know it looks like an average length for a sentence, so people might be tempted to think that it's a complete sentence, but it's actually a run-on. A mountain range crosses the continent. That's an independent clause. It is completely frozen is another independent clause. They're stuck together with nothing. There's not a comma there. They're just two complete independent clauses sort of smushed together with absolutely nothing. Finally, number 20, Antarctica's Mount Erebus, an active volcano. We're missing a verb. Antarctica's Mount Erebus is an active volcano. So because it's missing a verb, it's also missing a complete thought, and it is not a complete sentence. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're looking at when we're trying to determine the difference between complete sentences and fragments and run-ons. And there are lots of different resources you can look at to help you practice with that. Probably the best practice is to read some good professional writing, and that'll give you a feel for when a thought is complete. All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, and take care.